Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, so I guess count of three, we'll just do a clap.
Okay.
So 1, 2,
2,
3.
3.
That's close enough.
Eh,
I'll figure it out when,
when it's
because
time.
I'll be able to put our voices together and whatnot.
Okay.
Okay, so how do we do this?
That's not a question we should be asking once we start recording right there.
No, okay, let me figure this out. So I guess we introduce ourselves. But I will, I don't know if that's how you just start a podcast. So what, do I just go, hey, everybody? That sounds annoying.
No, just say hello. Hello.
Hey. So are we starting now?
Okay, let's start.
Ooh, restart.
Should I stop the recording?
No, because I can just edit all this out.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, what do we call them? Everyone? Hey, how's it going?
Hello.
Hey, welcome to Swords, Shields, etc. A podcast
Yeah.
about tabletop RPGs, and that's really about it. I'm one of your hosts, Arthur. I've been playing tabletop RPGs for the last 10 years. I started when I was around 11 years old. Um, and I've played everything from the usual Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, all the way to stuff like Mouse Guard and Stars Without Number and a whole bunch of other games. I usually am a player. I don't usually GM, so that's where my experience sort of comes from. And I guess I'll pass it on to my co-host and good friend over here.
Hi, I'm Justin. I'm the co-host of the show. I started playing about 4 years ago, starting off with basic 3.5 D&D, and I slowly got more love for the game and realized that I didn't want to be a player, I wanted to be a GM. Because there's a lot more fun things you get to do as a GM here and there. And, well, for the topic of the show, I guess, as you've already figured out, we're going to be talking about tabletop RPGs and our experiences with it because we have very different experiences, even though we've played together for a short while.
Yeah, and I think our goal with the podcast is to provide an introduction to new players, people who are interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop RPGs, who maybe heard about it or watched television shows that talk about it, and kind of want to get involved and kind of provide a little platform for them to learn more about the game and ask questions about the game, but also to have some a deep talk about mechanics, and provide some kind of debate around other tabletop games for more experienced players. Um, and I think that's a good way to put it, unless you have anything to add.
That and also that we're also going to be talking about things that are kind of common, not uncommon, in the sense of things like edition wars, uh, simple things such as character creation, but how unique they can be, jumping from uh, edition to edition and even from game to game. So it's topics like that are fun for not just us to talk about, but are unique in the sense that it's very common in every game, but it's not the same in every game.
I guess at the end of the day, we figured that we stay up and have conversations for 2 to 3 hours about tabletop games we've played together or separate, and we just thought it'd be cool to record those. I guess that that's really what the goal is, just to have a place to write all this down, have all of it written, not written, spoken.
So Arthur, how about what about for you? What's a tabletop RPG for you?
Sure. For me, it's a game that you play with a group of people. Uh, I wouldn't say you play it by yourself. Um, you need at least two people, one to kind of GM and another to play. But basically, it's a game where you and your friends or your group get together and create stories, uh, whether they be grand adventures or even just small slice of life type deals. Uh, usually involves in some way a creation of a character on players' parts or a creation of a world on a GM's part. I would say it's a lot different from a board game in the sense that you and your group do a lot of the creation process, while a board game kind of, gives you roles to play. And it's different because there is someone who's in charge that isn't just the rule book. There's the GM, the game master, is somebody who's in control of the world that the players are set in. Uh, I think an important part of what makes a tabletop RPG different from a tabletop board game is that creation aspect.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that the creation aspect is definitely one of the appeals for me and one of the most unique things when it comes to tabletops for me, or tabletop RPGs. I never really had an outlet for my creativity because I can't draw, I can't write stories, but I can put my friends through hell or give them a funny story to go through, which is really what a tabletop RPG lets me do. I can create a scenario as a GM and say, hey, I know you guys would like this, or you might hate it, but we're still going to go through it because we all agreed to meet, and we're going to have some fun. We're going to roll some dice. We might get shitty dice, we might get good dice, who knows? But at the end of the day, it's going to be a memory for only us to tell that you can never get from something like a board game or a video game where a lot of the scenarios are already set. You don't have that in a tabletop RPG. In D&D, you might kill the dragon, you might not, but you never had to fight the dragon at all. You could have turned around at the start of the road and say, I'm going to go back to town and have a drink. And I think that ability to go outside of the box and say, no, I don't have to do what you're telling me to do. I can decide to leave. I can do whatever I want as long as we're still playing the game. And that's still part of the game. Because the GM has to come up with everything. But it's going to be a fun time for everyone, especially the GM, because they get to push themselves to create something new, and the players will get to experience it as well, especially if it's on the fly, which is my favorite part about being a GM.
I think it's worthwhile to talk a little bit comparing it to other RPGs like um, the structure, I guess, of the character that you create is in many ways similar to certain video games in the sense that you create kind of your strength you have base strength, you have a base dexterity, a base constitution, a base intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So that's not that far off from games like Fallout or the Elder Scrolls, where you kind of create a character as a player. You kind of create this character, but the main difference is you don't need a computer screen, you don't need a game disc.
You just need another friend who's willing to help you go through all of that,
Yeah.
or be the unwilling subject of all of your ideas.
And you're not contained by code either. You're kind of contained by what you can come up with. Of course, tabletop RPGs do have books with certain rules to keep things lined up.
Yeah, because if there are no rules, then it's not really much of a game, because you can do whatever you want and say, hey, I win at the end because I said so.
Yeah, and there's no
But I
challenge.
think
Yeah.
it, yeah, but I think it is also worth pointing out that a lot of games like Fallout and Elder Scrolls, they were based off the original like D&D. Like Baldur's Gate is an RPG for a video game that a lot of people talk about. Like if they've played old school D&D, saying, "Yep, this is just like that." Like I died so quickly, and that was very reminiscent of the era. And games like that have definitely influenced games we have today. We don't have as many games that are as hard or as open world technically, but it's still the idea of there's you can do whatever you want. You're put in a scenario where you are playing a character, but what your character does is completely up to you. And just because you say I decide to leave, that's not the wrong answer, which I think a lot of video games have missed on, and I think that's why now more than ever D&D and other games like it are being seen as cool things to do, because after video games the next step in my eyes was either board games or tabletop RPGs, which I'm glad it is because it's so much fun.
Yeah, it's just that coming together and um, just creating a story with people is really, I think, what the baseline of tabletop RPGs are.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a game, and you do need other people to play it. But the, I don't know about you, but I feel like part of the biggest factor in how well a session goes in general, or how fun a game is, it's kind of based on the rules. Because this isn't like a shooter or like Fallout to a degree, or even Oblivion, where like, nope, I can just heal, I'll be fine, I can plan it all out. There's no variables that are thrown randomly here and there. Instead, you have to rely on a dice roll where it says, "Oh, you didn't roll high enough. I'm sorry. You got squashed by the giant that came flying towards you off that catapult.
Yeah, because you couldn't dodge out of the way fast
You
enough.
couldn't dodge, or for whatever reason they had a better roll than you, depending on what it is, or you lost the arm wrestle because that guy rolled a 20 and you rolled a 19. Really sucks. But at the same time, it allows things that would be impossible to occur, such as if you know the odds are against you, you're surrounded by 1,000 men. If you just roll that one d20 and you get on a 20 because it's a crit, you've won. You've succeeded in whatever you're trying to do, and that being a possibility is what makes the game great. Because there's never a 0% chance of succession. There's always a chance you can succeed, no matter how slim the chances are. It just depends on how willing your GM is to bend the fiction to give you that victory or follow the rules depending on the system.
Yeah, but even though it's based on luck, there's enough elements of kind of player manipulation you can do during character creation to kind of make sure that you can do certain things. So
Yeah,
if you take D&D for example, if you want your character to be a really good swimmer, there's a swim skill, and if you put points in the swim skill, you're going to be more likely to succeed on swimming than maybe acrobatics or performing a dance or song routine based on your own personal preference.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that's another thing that TTRPGs have over a lot of other games. I wouldn't say RPGs in general for video games, but it's the idea that you can build a new character and play the game again, and the results will always be different because it's not necessarily the same story or the same world or the same group of characters. It can always be different, and one session is not like another, which makes every moment memorable.
I mean, even if you have a GM who wants to play a similar story, it keeps creating a similar world. Just the fact that you play different characters really can affect what happens.
No. Because if your new character somehow knows a person that your old character didn't, the story has already changed. Because you can say, no, I want to call on that person to help me out.
Or if your new character is a murderous maniac, then all of a sudden you have nothing.
Like 50% of most people's characters. But that's a decision for most players. Not much
Yeah.
the GM can do about that.
Yeah, if you kill the person who wants to give you a quest, you're not going on that quest.
Uh, Up for a debate. But,
Well, it depends on the GM too. How
depends how willing the GM wants you to go through that story. If I'm like,
yeah.
you really need to kill that dragon because he's kind of sitting on your house, at some
Mhm.
point, I hope you fight that dragon. Otherwise, I hope you have good home insurance.
But yeah, there's a lot that I like about tabletops over video games or board games and stuff like that. Most of it comes from that creation process, but a lot of it comes from just hanging out and it's a much more, I feel like, personal face to face type gaming than you get with video games, because you do have to organize time to meet up with people. It's not like, hey, so and so is online, let's go play a round of Overwatch or something. It's very much like, hey, are we all good for 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or whatever. It's more time consuming, sure. It makes it more difficult to organize games because of that. Uh, but there's something more personal about it.
Well, it's because you created it. It's not like a video game where you kind of are subjected to rules in that sense, where it's like, well, I can't be the dual wielding monkey who has a gun on his tail at all times and he throws grenades every once in a while using his feet while using his hands to like control glider and sail through the sky. I mean, you probably can't do that in D&D either, but if you work hard enough, I'm sure you can figure a way out to do it. If someone figures it out, please tell me because I want to try that out.
Well, that and you have more options when it comes to what game you're playing anyway. So maybe D&D doesn't have that as an option, but another system.
Yeah, just slight problem of paying. But these days, a lot of people understand the games. You can find out the games from being online. And I'm not saying download the games for free because that's never good for any industry. But it's along the lines of if you hear about a game and you're like, I want to play in that system or something along those lines. It's not like a video game where you're like, well, I really want it to be more stealthy. If you want it to be more stealthy, make it more stealthy. If you're the GM or player, you can have a conversation with the group and say, guys, I know this is what the game is built for, but I kind of want it to be a bit more of this or a bit more of that. Or can we do a comedy instead of all serious? Because I live a very hard life and I don't need more serious in my life. I just want to relax. And I think that's another thing tabletops you can get. You can't play a serious game like Spec Ops The Line where the ending is very brutal and very very realistic in terms of war and say, well, I was having a great time because, I shot a dude and we had jokes. You can't do that. But in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, if everyone's agreeing, yeah, let's have a fun time. Let's just tell poopy jokes and pee-pee jokes and have a fun time, just not, being too serious. If everyone can get on board, then it's a fun experience because it's something you wanted and you got out of the game. So I think as well, at least for tabletop RPGs, I mean, we keep talking about video games, but I do think that there are games kind of closer, sort of like board games that you mentioned before, that I'm not sure are. It's really hard, let me put it this way, to talk about a tabletop RPG and use the term board game in my eyes, because people get confused with, oh, D&D, it's just another Monopoly game. I'm like, it really isn't, because the table is kind of only there for me to write stuff on. That's really it at this point.
Well, especially nowadays too, when you can play online.
Yeah, and I think that's another point that we can talk about, that playing online is changed the scope of the game in a lot of ways. I have friends who live in the middle of nowhere and they're able to play like every week and they're very happy about it because they have the internet and they're able to play with people like me halfway across the world.
But yeah, when it comes to the way people view tabletops from outside of the community that plays them, I've heard a lot of times people being like, "Oh, it's like a board game. How is it different than Clue? A game where you take on the role of somebody in this murder mansion type deal, and you either know that you're the murderer or trying to find the murderer, and you're finding all these clues and stuff. And you in that game you do have a role. You're either Mr. Plum or is it Professor Plum and Mr. Green or whatever.
I haven't played Clue in years. I don't know who any of these people are.
No, yeah,
I'll trust that they're all good people.
Yeah, but you're given a card, and that's the person you're playing as. Of course, it's different because there's not, stats or skills based on each character. It's not like Professor Plum is smarter than, uh, is it Miss Scarlet? I'm gonna pull this up.
One of those characters. But no, I definitely understand what you're saying about how they're not the same. Like, it's not the same. It does. Board games is already a very broad range. It's like video games. It's like I'm playing a video game. Are you playing an MMO? Are you playing a single person like shooter? You're playing Overwatch with your friends. They're all video games, but they're not necessarily the same. I think, but I think tabletop RPGs are even further distanced to board games because one, you require dice, and yeah, some board games require dice, but I think a bigger thing is you need the creativity. Not all board games require creativity, but every tabletop RPG requires creativity, both as a GM and as a player, which I think is very unique, especially in this day of age where a lot of our things are kind of built for us and we don't need as much creativity for our games or to have fun as much these days because everything's kind of already established.
It is definitely a kind of stretching out your creative muscle. Uh, because if there's someone sitting at the table playing D&D with you and they're not in some way having a creative experience or playing a character, if they're just playing, I mean, playing yourself isn't a problem.
Mm.
But
We do it in video games. I'd say saying, "Oh, this person is very much like me," but I think ending it there is not great. And I'm not saying you can't do it or you can't base it off like a movie character like Captain Jack Sparrow or like I want to play Captain America. That's not bad. At least you're playing a character. It's better than someone who looks at it and says, "Well, I would have fun doing that, but I'm going to do this instead because it's the more optimal route." That's a different style of play, which I personally disagree with, but it's still a style of play that anyone can do. But at the end of the day, it depends on each player to say, I want to do this, and I would have more fun doing this than that. Because every person's different, especially when it comes to tabletops, because everyone has an opinion in the world of tabletop RPGs.
mhm. Well, and there's different styles of play that exist amongst players and GMs too. There are the GMs that will do voices for each character and like act the roles of the world, and players that do the same thing. But then there are players who will be like, my character says something along the lines of this, uh, and that that's a play style that's a bit more distant, I think, but it's still acceptable. I feel like the newer players I've played with tend to be more,
Yeah, that's
um,
that's in my experience as well.
yeah.
But to be fair, I think part of it is I've never done something like this before. If I do that, do you think I'll be weird? No, I'm just gonna play it safe. I'm gonna play a bit closer to myself, especially if it's an entire group of new people. If you're a new player in a group of people who've already played, the people that have played before, I hope they're nice enough to be like, just do whatever's comfortable with you. We're not gonna judge. And surprisingly, at least in my experience, people that play tabletop RPGs are usually the most understanding of people.
I do agree in my experience that I've seen a lot more happy stories rise up out of tabletops than sad ones. And there's always horror stories on the internet you read about
I mean, it's
a
the
group
internet.
that
The internet is
yeah
built on horror stories of some kind. So,
yeah and you always read two of those crazy stories. I think like one. Well, this is actually let's have a little question time. I think this would be interesting to talk about. Uh, what is it that made you play? Like, what got you into tabletop RPGs? Because I know for like what you said, like 4 years ago you started playing,
yeah.
and uh,
Oof.
because I've been playing. I was introduced to it by my father, and a group of his friends would come over all the time and play D&D since they were kids. And when I was younger, I was like, oh, what's everyone up to down in the basement? They're always laughing or having a good time, and I just kind of started watching them play, and then eventually making my own character and joining them, and then going to school and having my friends come over and play games. So I had a much more, I think, like an organic kind of introduction to it, like the same way you'd be introduced to music or movies from your parents. Yeah, but what got you into it though? Because I don't think I've ever
Yeah,
heard
so
this
for
story.
me, it was I used to be a big time StarCraft 2 player. Well, I say big time, but I really sucked at the game. But I watched a lot of videos online from groups, and one of them, JP, had a podcast called State of the Game. And then one day he sent a message on Twitter or tweeted that he was feeling like he wanted to play second edition D&D. And he's like, how would everyone feel if I made a show like that? And some guy in the SC2 community, he responded and said, uh, if we're talking about second edition, that's my jam. And slowly they started getting people within the community and like, okay, let's build a game. And then when they played it, I wasn't there at the beginning, but I caught up like as soon as I heard about it because it was really unique at the time. We didn't have things like Geek and Sundry who were giving us that kind of content. You know, we didn't have Critical Role or any of the games that followed, like any of the people that followed behind them. And still at that time, I think D&D was still seen very as, oh, that's what, the real nerds play. Even though that's not what it was at all. But again, coming from a distant like point of view, because I lived in China and Singapore for during that time, and I had never even heard of D&D, or when I heard of D&D, it was from like an 80s movie where like those kids are in a cult, they play D&D. And it just kind of stuck in my mind. I'm like, well, those movies make no sense, but there must be a reason D&D is in all these movies, right? But I think that after watching, I just got a sudden urge to be like, I want to play that because they looked like they were having so much fun making their own characters, doing whatever they wanted. And as soon as I got to college, um, I really wanted to play. Unfortunately, I didn't know anyone, so I didn't really have the opportunity. But I think in the second semester of my freshman year, uh, some upperclassmen were like, "Hey, we're gonna do a game of Pathfinder," and I was like, "That sounds like D&D, and you said it is basically D&D, so I'll play it because I want to." And after that first experience, I was just hooked. It was just a huge rush of rolling dice and doing like impossible feats and winning and not saving the day because I don't think we ever really saved the day, but surviving, I think is a better way of putting it, despite everything that happened. And I had a lot of fun. I wasn't like most of the first time players that we talked about before, where they're like, oh, uh, my character does X, and or I think I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to jump on its back. Instead, it was more along the lines of I was having a fun time. I was speaking with like a mannerism. I was having fun, and I think the group as well made it great because we were all very open to what was going on because most of us were first time players. So yeah, that was. It's a bit different from the more traditional stories I hear, where like, oh, I was playing one since I was a kid or something. I'm like, well, I didn't have that opportunity. I moved around a decent amount, and every time you're like, oh, I'm getting closer to sticking around. They're just like, nope, you're moving again. So it really sucked, but hey, at least I got into the hobby at some point, so I'm happy about that.
It seems though that the traditional story, that I had, learned about it from, a parent or someone older and played it. It seems like that's starting to die out a lot.
Yeah, I don't think it will as much soon. I think our generation again is going to be the next group that does this all over again, where it's like, well, I love D&D and D and I still play it, or I used to play it like back in college or something, and I want my child to try it out because I think the most dangerous thing for at least for D&D is the fear of how number crunchy and all that stuff, and then people see it as, oh, that's what nerds do to like kind of have fun or to like do to have their own little imagination time. No, they're not any different than anybody. They just have a different way of having fun. And look, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't having that much fun from the game. So it's not a stupid way like to have fun. It's a great way to have fun. If anything, it's the most creative way to have fun.
Yeah, but yeah, like we were saying before, a lot of your story reminds me of a lot of people's that we started playing with once we met, and started finding people around our around college that wanted to play, because it always seems like it was either, oh, I started, I was on YouTube one day and I found, Critical Role, and I listened to, all, the whole game, caught up 100%, and now I just wanted to, play it by myself. Or, you have other people who are like, well, I was watching, like Stranger Things or something, and they play D&D in one of the episodes and that, and they're like, oh, it made me want to try it out. It almost seems like media is starting to portray it less as a nerdy thing too, which I like.
I think media because I don't think people realize how many people have actually played D&D. Like we have people like Vin Diesel, like Stephen Colbert, like famous people who said, "Nah, I had a shit ton of fun playing that," and I'm happy that that's the message we're getting. There's really I haven't heard any celebrity or someone actually famous who's like D&D. I hated that game. I don't think anyone who like that's in popular media has actually said that. We're like, nah, 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 that game was awful. And I think that's a huge thing because a lot of people that follow either Stephen Colbert or Vin Diesel are like, "Oh, you used to play D." Well, if that guy used to play D&D, I don't see why I can't play D&D now. And I think that's helping a lot with the hobby because, like you said, things like Stranger Things, it's a bigger form of media that more people will watch, and everyone's like, "Well, D&D looked kind of cool in that show, so maybe I'll give it a shot."
Especially having children playing it too, because um, I feel like a lot of the people that I know who play D&D are 30 or older, or around our age, um, in their 20s, or right, in college or right out of college. But it really is something that I mean, I played when I was 11 when I started playing with my dad, but I was maybe 12 or 13, 14 years old when I started playing with friends. Because we all lived in the same town. You just came over my house. I GM'd the first one because I was the only person who knew the rules. But eventually, a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you know what? I really enjoy this. Maybe I'll try GMing." And he read all the books and was a lot
That's how
better. Was a
that's how it
lot better
starts.
than I was, because I love playing characters. I love it to bits. I not that great at creating seamless worlds, or at least creating a story that. And if I do create a story, I tend to stay very strict to what I want to happen, which isn't the best option. I feel like when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or anything, because you're gonna have players who want to do not what you want them to do.
Yeah, the golden rule as a GM is you can't expect what your players are going to do, but do try your best. That's about it. There's nothing else you can do. You have to say, well, they can go one, two, or three. But that doesn't mean four, five, six, seven, eight, all the way up to 100 don't exist. So I'm just going to put safety measures here and there. So if something kind of happens, I can kind of bullshit my way through it. Why not?
Yeah, and the other thing too was all my friends who played with me growing up. We were all in the theater programs at school, um, which I think kind of opened up which kind of explains why everyone wanted to play a character rather than GM or anything, because there's kind of that aspect of acting within it.
Yeah, I would even counter that and say, I think you can really only have fun with it if you're a player. I think if you're a director or a producer, someone who's like, oh, I must have the control of the story, I don't think at least the D&D we're talking about is the kind of game they would enjoy. Where it's like, no, but you were supposed to go through that door because all these reasons. It's so obvious. And they're like, yeah, but that door had the picture of a horsey on it, and we like horsies.
Yeah,
So we're going through that door.
but there's a difference too between playing modules and making up a story as well.
Yeah, no. So I think modules have done a great job for their purpose, which I think is to give people the opportunity to GM.
Hmm.
I don't think it's the best way to GM, though.
Yeah, I think it's a great introduction. If you want a GM, it's great to have the company that makes the game give you a layout, give you maps, give you
Saying, oh, if someone rolls this high on this kind of check, they can do it. Yeah.
here are the enemies that are in the next room. Here are here's the main story that's happening while you explore something, some palace or whatever, or escape a prison.
Yeah, no, and I think modules, while they do a great job in that aspect, I do think in other ways they kind of fall short. Like, I don't think they scale very well. I also don't think as a GM, at least when you decide to have the courage to create your own campaign and run your own games and say, okay, I'm going to develop these fights or I'm going to put these obstacles. The hardest part is being a first time GM, at least for me, was figuring out what was considered challenging and what was considered easy. I think my favorite example of this is that I created a fight where there were five avatars who were fighting, and behind them were five uh, torches lit up that were very bright and very strong. And it was just something I threw in. For some reason, my players decided, oh, that's how we defeat them. We have to turn off the lights. I don't know where they got that idea from, but they proceeded not to fight the guys. They proceeded to get around the guys and like splash water on the lights. Um, being a first time GM, I was like, no, that's not how this works. I'm sorry. But if I was a better GM, I think I probably, or how I am now, I probably would have gone with it because that's a very creative way to have a fight, even though that wasn't how I intended it to go. I think being a good GM is also being able to adapt on the fly, which I don't think everyone has the ability to do. But you don't need to be. That's why there's players and GMs, because not everyone can do what both sides do. Because I'm awful at playing characters. I'm so bad at it.
It's funny that you think that way, and I'm the complete opposite. Where if someone comes up to me, he's like, "Oh, can you GM a game for us?" I usually say no. My brother doesn't play a lot. Well, hasn't played D&D at all or anything. But he came up to me this summer and was like, "Hey, me and my friends really want to try out try out a game. Maybe one or two sessions just to see if we like it, and if we like it, we'll expand it more. Do you want a GM for us?" And I kind of was like yeah. We ended up playing just a module that I found because I couldn't come up with anything. But I mean, we had a good time with it, and there were moments where they would do something that wasn't exactly in line with what I expected, but kind of jumping back onto your feet. Or there are moments in the module where I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe, they fought all these goblins, and one of them decided to try and charm it, and now the goblin's their friend. I'll let that happen, and I'll let that expand into something bigger maybe at the end, where, oh, you can't get through this door, but, oh, that goblin friend of yours knows the passcode. You don't have to worry about fighting all the monsters, or, he has a key that opens this chest and gives you treasure.
Yeah, because the modules will never, just like how a GM can't calculate what his players are going to do, a module, no way can it figure out what, like, 100,000 people are going to do if they're presented with the same opportunity. Well, I'm very good at telling people to do what I tell them to do, so I'm going to tell them what to do. Another guy says, well, I have a very pointy sword, and you have a very dead body that I could point my sword into, so I think I'm going to do that. And then, yeah, the modules are meant for more of those type of players who are willing to kill everything, not really ask questions, but if they decide to, most likely the question is reasonable and expected.
Yeah, from my experience with modules, it's usually some kind of delving into a cave or dungeon, where every enemy is going to be hostile.
Yeah.
Instead of having, you're in a town and you need to, get something from
Oh,
from
because
the
towns are
palace.
dangerous. I'm not gonna lie. Towns are the most dangerous areas in terms of planning anything. Because you're like, most I can do is give some names, put some shop names and stuff, maybe an event that's going on. But I'm not gonna go any further. Because if I go any further, they're gonna say, well, I really liked that deal that guy gave me, so I want to be his friend. Does he have a job I can take for him? Or something like that? And I'll be like, you really want a job from him? I'm sorry, he doesn't have a job for you. It's like, how about I help you expand your business? And then suddenly it's like, well, of course the businessman wants to expand his business. So I gotta jump from there. Somehow you're 5 towns over and saying, preaching the word of God, saying he has given you a sword that can, like, light on fire at will. Like, that's, a bit of a step in the wrong direction in terms of the module, but you have this, I imagine you're having a lot of fun if you somehow got to that point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interplay between players and GMs that's really fun. Whether it's a GM being like, oh, this player really thinks they know what they're doing when it comes to combat. I'm gonna throw something really crazy at them and see if they can survive it or if they have to run away. Um, and or players being like, well, I think my GM wants me to do this, this, and that, but I don't think my character would. Let's see how much I can mess with the GM.
Oh my god, that's actually interesting. I've never even thought about that
What?
as a player, where I'm thinking, oh, that's what the GM wants me to do. I don't even think on that level. I'm just like, I want to do this. That's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do. I, I I don't play very often, and when I get to play, I get to do my crazy characters where I'm like, I'm a space cook who has multiple identities and will make you eat the food I serve you. Like, and that's as far as I went. I was like, you weren't expecting a space food opera, were you now, huh?
Yeah, but there are a lot of times where, especially when I was playing with you, because you're very open ended as a GM, and I'm very rambunctious as a player. I like to cause trouble. Uh, there are moments where I was like,
To be
oh,
fair,
I
I
know.
don't think most of it is your fault. I think a lot of it is my fault as well, where I'm just like, maybe.
Yeah,
And then suddenly, like, I'm going to act on that maybe. Yeah, sure.
I'll be like, I see where Justin's going with this, or like, I know where Justin's pulling this from. Uh, but you know what I mean. Like, I can see where this is headed. Let's just completely subvert his expectations. But again, I do it within character.
As time went on, I was able to calculate. I was able to be like, this is what Arthur's going to think I want him to do. No, 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 no. This is what's going to happen if he tries to pull that stuff on me. Which was always, which I think is interesting too. If you're a GM for long enough with a group of people, you'll develop a sort of like, not just inside jokes and stuff like that, or it's like, oh yeah, as a group, do you remember when we did that, like the memories? But you'll also develop like nuances, saying, oh, I know that person really likes to play stabby characters, so they're not gonna have fun unless I give them something to stabby. But that player loves mystery and intrigue and stuff like that. So why don't I combine the both? So both will have a fun time. And I think even more importantly is that they both don't fulfill the same role. So both of them feel useful. Because I think as a GM, you have more power than anyone else in that regard, where you're sort of the source of the fun in the game. And that's not always the case. The players can do it too. Whether it's just from one stupid line that they say or something like, okay, I decided to jump off the castle. It's like, you do realize that you're going to die, right? No, 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 no. I got the thing to keep me alive, and it's in the rule book,
I
so it's okay.
rolled a 20 on the acrobatics check. You can't stop me.
I just sit there. I'm like, well, I could say crits don't work, but that'd be no fun. So
Crits don't work when you jump off a 300-foot
I don't
tower.
know if even a rule is necessary for that, but okay.
Oh, but there was a streamer and you grabbed onto that.
Yeah, no, the amount of stuff you can just make up when you're on the spot. You're like, there was a gun. I thought we're in a fantasy world. There was a cannon, and it fired a cannonball, and you held on to it, and now you're on the ship. Congratulations.
Or I'm gonna crash my spaceship into that space station, and then I'm gonna be inside. Okay.
Okay, I hope you have a suit on, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's about it. Like, and I think having the ability to do that, like going giant circle all the way back to the beginning, is what makes D&D fun, especially as a player, where you can do the stupid shit. I mean, the GM might not like you for it, your friends might hate you. Like, why? We had a plan. And you're just like, well, you took too long. I got bored. Generally, I think that's probably the most fun, where you're just having a fun time, and whether it's you be all very serious and say, no, we're hunting down the greatest magician in the world and we're going to kill him, to, well, I heard about space cows. I don't know where we're going to find one, but I want a herd. I want a whole herd of space cows to make a space milk so we can make that a brand. And then suddenly you spend like 3 sessions looking for space cow, only to realize it's a different meaning entirely and not actually a cow that lives in space. I think, I mean, it's really hard to explain what the most fun parts of a tabletop RPG unless you've played. I mean, in terms of stories you can have as a GM, there are so many that you can have as a GM versus being a player. Because as a player, you kind of have only one side of the picture. As a GM, you have all sides of like the coin that somehow is now standing in the middle, has been sliced in half, and now you're inside it somehow. Where you're like, well, I didn't expect them to do that. But now I have all the pieces in the puzzle to figure out how they got there. Something as simple as, well, should I shoot the guy? Well, I don't know if I don't think I should because he has fancy clothes, and I was told specifically that he's not wearing fancy clothes. But then, as the GM, you know that he heard about that information and decided to change clothes. Now, if the players for some reason are like, "Well, we're going to shoot him anyways," I think it's interesting to like ask them like, "How did you get to that point?" If they give you like an answer, whether it's because of hints you dropped intentionally or unintentionally, I think that's really interesting because you can be like, "My players are actually smart," and that makes it both scary and wonderful because I have to be careful of what I say now. But I think that's also a lot of fun because as the GM, when your players do something you don't expect and you thought you expected everything, you feel like a sense of proudness, especially if it's something like creative, where it's like, oh, you know, I don't. Wait, hold on. Is there a sewer system? And then obviously in your head you're like, well, there's got to be a sewer system, Justin. Why didn't you think of the sewer system, you idiot? But you're gonna keep going, and eventually you're gonna get there, and you're like, that was a lot of fun because they pushed me to a spot I never thought they were even gonna go.
Yeah, and that, and also there are people who take D&D seriously, and there are people who take it casually and whatnot. But one of my favorite things about all the different campaigns I've ever played in is that there are some that give me that same kind of feeling of like epicness as like Lord of the Rings, or something that's a really serious type story. And then there are other campaigns I've played where I'm like, oh, this is this is funny and energetic, and kind of has a more like Guardians of the Galaxy kind of feel to it, as opposed to you know Game of Thrones. But having the ability to have games that feel like both uh, is is great too, because sometimes when you sit down to watch a movie, sometimes you want something comedic, sometimes you want something dramatic, and it's the same thing with tabletops. uh
It's a bit harder to, turn on the TV and say, now
yeah,
we're gonna play a fun
yeah.
game of D&D where we're all going
Mhm.
to laugh. It's a bit harder to do that versus we're playing the serious game. I have to be serious, especially as a GM, getting into like that mode. You're like, everyone's got to be serious for 4 hours. Everyone's got to be serious for 4 hours.
But that was something that my dad and his friends were more interested in. Was a lot of the games I played with them were epic on the scale of something like Lord of the Rings, where it was serious and they knew the lore and they knew the kingdoms and they knew who was in charge, and there was
That
big
requires writing
bad
notes. We're
battle.
very bad at that, Arthur.
Yeah,
In case you forget, we're very bad at taking notes.
we're bad at that. But my dad and his friends weren't, and a lot of their games came down to moments where you're like, oh, that was so epic because you did this and that, or oh, you said that one line to the king, and like it reminded him of years ago when this and that happened, and you really just put him in
Man,
his place.
that plus 20 persuade,
Yeah,
so good.
which is crazy. But then you have other experiences where you're traveling in space on a food truck, and you're with a bunch of people who are misfits and crazy, you know, vagabond.
Feels very much like Guardians of the Galaxy to a degree, at least the first one.
Yeah, but that kind of ability to have those two story options open to you, and more than just those two, um, is what I think makes tabletops even more entertaining, because I like to have those experiences and have them separate or
No,
together.
I definitely agree, especially since I think another thing, at least, that we haven't really talked as much about is the group itself. You can easily see, like, maybe you can see one of your friends as the jokester. You don't probably want to bring that person for the most serious campaign in the world where you're going to save the day, and if you fail, the world ends. There's nothing funny about that. Whereas, if you play together and you're like, okay, I won't play a game with this friend, what game would we enjoy? It's got to be a game that can have some comedy. How about a game where we're teenagers or something like that? Or like Call of Cthulhu, except it's more like Scooby Doo, something like that. Like then having a player like that would be a lot of fun. Or games for the atmosphere you want, it depends a lot on the players, more so than the GM, because the GM can try as hard as they want to make it as serious as possible, but all it takes is one poopy joke, and suddenly it's a comedy. There's nothing you can do about it.
And there's nothing saying that you can't have like a comedic game and then one session delve into like some deep dark backstory.
No, because there's always stuff like that, like lingering around where everyone's like, I want a bit of something different. But if, as the GM, you can't get everyone to agree with you that this is now a comedy game or this is now a very serious game, it's just not going to work, unfortunately. Because there's a difference of goal, like ideas of what the campaign is about, which really hurts most of the time. I thankfully have never experienced it, but I have heard of other people that are like, oh, I thought we were going to play a game where it's very open ended. Next thing I know, I'm on a railroad and I can see the destination from my seat.
But there's not a problem with that if everyone agrees.
There's
If
not
everyone
a. I
agrees to
think
what
you
kind
all
of
have to
adventure.
know
Yeah, yeah.
beforehand. Yeah. Because if you go in with different expectations, you're gonna build a character and play the game differently than how you probably would if you knew the circumstances going in.
Well, yeah, well, the other thing too is, how long have you played with the people you're playing with and stuff? Because when I played with my high school friends, it got to the point where we knew, um, we knew who each other's characters were because we played the same characters, for a couple years actually. Until we hit like level 20 and and we're all powerful gods or dead.
You are the gods, and
Yeah, and
that's all you need to be.
so the GM's experience got a bit more interesting in the sense that he knew more so what our characters would do in certain situations, which allowed him to create a much more, I guess, cohesive plot line near the end. Because at first it was mostly just, hey, can you help us out? There's, skeletons in the cave and they're trying to kill the villagers. All right, we'll kill them. But then it evolved into, hey, you remember that guy you helped like 7 or 8 sessions ago? Well,
I can't
it's a
remember that far, even as a GM.
yeah,
I don't know why you expect me
it's a
to.
good thing you helped him because now he's coming back to, do something and he's going to give you a reward. And, it turns out that's great. And those kind of long form campaigns start to evolve into something more railroady, I feel, than stuff where you sit down and just go, hey guys, let's make characters real fast, and do like just one quick story just really fast, and have fun with it.
Yeah, no, and I definitely think that for a long-term campaign, having a railroady kind of session is not bad, or even having a railroady campaign is bad, because you know what people are like at that point. You can say, I can calculate most of the things they're going to do. Very rarely will it be something I'm not expecting, so it's fine. But I think for early on, you have to be a bit more prepared for people to say, nope, I'm taking this a different turn than you thought this was going to take. I think an example for me would be I one of my friends, he described a character where he was very serious and he was very, oh, I'm for justice and all that. And the next thing I know, he's trying to open up a bakery, essentially. And said, nope, I'm done with all that. And I'm like, we haven't even done anything to make you go this way. What happened? And I don't blame him so much because he was a new player. I don't think he had the consistency to keep up. But I do think it is a problem, at least early on, that's not too unique. Because when you make your character, it's just words on a paper. It's not until you play the game that a voice is created and like an identity is assumed. And I think that's the most dangerous thing for people, especially that love to make characters, but never play it. The way you envision your character is never going to be the way it turns out, almost 100% of the time. Where you have one character who's like, I'm going to be jokey and all that, and then suddenly there's a scenario where you expected yourself to do this, but you just don't. And it could be a number of reasons. There could be other characters that are influencing your decisions now, because you don't want to look like an ass to the girl that apparently seduced you and you have the hots for now. Or you're just like, I don't think I would actually do that anymore. I changed my mind. That was too dark for my character.
Yeah, and I'm the kind of person who creates the personality first and then tries to fit the stats to match what I want. But even then, take take a character I play with you, for example, like where Dordry was supposed to be this stern by the books kind of gunslinger guy, and he by the time we got into the game and I met all the a ton of crazy wacky people who lived the exact opposite life. My character had rules he set for himself. He was stern in those rules. That's what he had to follow, and he's living in a world where people just act on whims. And he became almost this curmudgeon just an old man. It's like super
An old
super
man at the age of 30. It was amazing.
down and angry at the world with his his rifle on his back and his pistol in its holster. and his character changed from someone who was like, oh, you know what, we have to do everything by my set of rules and my code and convictions, to someone who's like, you know what, fine, we'll just do it that way. We'll just whatever at this point, because he's surrounded by people who just behave on whims, and other player characters or other NPCs who are like, I want this, I'm gonna do this, instead of having that strict code.
I think, in my defense, I don't think that Dorju is the only serious character. I just think that a lot of the NPCs were manipulated by the other
Yeah, okay,
player to become a lot more favored towards her, more so than Dordry. Because to be fair, the first few things you did were set quite a tone for everybody else.
But what I'm saying is that kind of evolution of character is interesting when it's long form, because it took a good 4 or 5 sessions before my character was like, you know what, I've had enough of this.
Started changing when you're like, everyone hates me for everything I do, therefore I must change.
Therefore I must change because I have no friends and I'm sad.
Yeah.
But there are times where you're playing, especially with newer players, where where the player themselves just comes up on a whim, like, oh, my character wants this now. I like when new players get creative though with
that
stuff
is
like
the
that,
best
where they're like, oh,
moment.
maybe I didn't think of this while I was creating my character, and maybe I didn't think about this 2 or 3 sessions ago, but now I thought about this wonderful idea about some little tick or just something that my character does or is, that's gonna change.
This entire time I forgot to mention to the entire group that, I don't know, I used to be that, and that's not a bad thing. At least you're willing to expand. It's the people who expect the characters to kind of be sort of an avatar for themselves to play with, their personality and everything, that I begin to have a bit of an issue in terms of, you gotta take some risks and not do the thing that you expect only yourself would do, unless you're actually playing yourself, in which case, I hope next game you don't do that as well, because it gets a bit dodgy when you keep playing the same type of character. Well, not the same type of character, when you keep playing yourself, I should say. Because it feels like everyone else is playing a game and you are doing your own little thing over in this corner, and you happen to be tagging along because, we're all in the same room.
Yeah, but I mean, for new players, it makes it a lot easier to play a character that you would kind of understand what they would do, and so playing yourself, I don't think, is a huge problem in your first game or for your first character.
Yeah, first game, but I think if you continue doing it, it's a bit more of a problem, because you're like, you played yourself like two games ago, and we were kind of fine with it the 2 games, but we're kind of trying to be evil this campaign, and you're too much of a goody two shoes to really let us do that. It's like, no, I'll be the voice of reason. It's like, yeah, but I think we all agreed that we just kind of want to kill people and have fun that kind of way.
But how do you feel about pre-mades though?
Pre-made characters?
Yeah, pre-made characters. So let's say I set up a session with, this is something I did a while ago, where a couple of my friends in high school, who I played with all the time, their friends were hearing about our games and everything, and they wanted to play with us just for a session or two. But they were a little iffy about creating characters, so I found sheets online, and just told them, hey, pick which one of these looks nicest to you. Do you want to play the basic paladin build or the basic fighter build?
I don't think it's bad. I think it's actually very good, especially to have pre-builts. I don't think anyone's going to ever say, man, pre-built characters are the worst thing in the world, because they're not optimized most of the time. They're not made to be the most broken character in all of existence that can actually achieve godhood by level 3. It's a character where you're like, well, we envisioned them doing something very specialized. That's what they're going to do. You're an illusionist, or you're an enchanter, or you're a shapeshifter, or you're very good at punching people. Those are the goals that we have set for you. So that's what your characters are going to be. Now, as a new player, I wouldn't blame a new player, but more experienced players, if you're handed a pre-built sheet for whatever reason, such as, oh, we just don't have time to make characters, or oh, this is a big event with a lot of new players and whatnot, or you're just at a convention, sort of like Pathfinder Society. They'll just hand you a sheet and say, yeah, if you finish, you get XP and put on one of your characters.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting. Like, it's not bad. It's good because you should be able to role play that character how you imagine them being role played. You shouldn't, as an experienced player, I don't think you should be relying on your own personality to do it. Because, like I said before, if you get past the first game and you're like, well, I want to keep playing myself because I have so much darn fun playing myself, you're going to have to come to terms with not everyone's going to agree that that's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, again, that's if you're playing with the same group every time you play a
Yeah, I
campaign,
mean,
too.
obviously that is the case, but I think at the same time, especially if the game goes on for a while, people might get a bit tired of you playing yourself in a game because everyone else has to work a bit harder. Like that guy has to put on an accent or something. And I don't say everyone has to match a guy who has an accent or is just very good at a certain voice, but I do think you have to put some effort in into like, oh, my character would do this because, and I don't think the answer should every time be because I would do it or like one of the major reasons like I can see myself doing that. I think if you create a character, especially who, if you're in a darker game for some reason, you're not going to react to things the same way you do because they have a very traumatic experience that you yourself hap have never had happen to you. So you shouldn't play the character the same way. You should play the character and how they would react if the things that you say in their backstory did occur. And I think that's kind of the point of being a good player and even more so a good GM. A good GM shouldn't allow a player to like play the same character over and over and over again cuz in my eyes I don't personally I don't see it one as fun, but two I think if the person really enjoys the hobby, you should try to push them to be something more than what they're used to. Cuz tabletop RPGs for first reason if you're already in like the hobby, I personally think you should be a bit more open to what's going on, especially if you want to say you're actually a tabletop RPG fan. You can't just say I only play one game because it's the only game that ever existed, because that's just not true. For the same reason that you shouldn't play the one class that you play because it's the only class that ever existed. It's not true.
Yeah, that's where I think bringing it back to pre-made characters. I think that's where they're helpful. Like if,
Yeah.
as a GM, if you're seeing someone who's struggling creating something unique or something different than what they've been playing for a while, having that pre-made sheet where, let's say in the notes section it has this is this person's goals,
Yeah.
or this is what that this is kind of what their personality is outlined.
Yeah, I think my slight problem with that is I think it should be seen as suggestions, especially if you're a new player.
Oh yeah,
If
yeah, yeah.
you're willing to move the goals to another way or take it a different direction, you shouldn't always listen to the sheet. It's kind of the issue I have with D&D with the alignment system,
Mm-hmm.
where yeah, you're neutral, yeah, okay, that makes sense, or oh, you're lawful good, yeah, that makes sense. Human beings aren't like that in my eyes. Human beings are very much on a whim. Sometimes we do this thing. Usually we're like that, but sometimes, just sometimes, we decide to steal, or sometimes you're like, you know what? I'm tired of holding back for just one fight. I'm very upset. And then they decide to hit them. Well, now you can be accused of not playing the character because you were not playing to your alignment, which I don't think is correct. I think you're just playing yourself as a human, where you're emotional over something, and that clouds you act differently as a result. It's not the same as always. So I think having that as like a pre-made character, while I think it's good for someone who has absolutely no idea how to roleplay, kind of do something unique, I don't think you should take it as the frickin' Bible or something where you have to obey whatever it says. I think you can look at it and say, I don't feel like playing that kind of goody two shoes. I think I'm going to be a bit more chaotic. Something like that.
It reminds me of back when we were in school and we had that one we ran that event
Yeah.
where we had pre-made characters available for people who are interested to learn how to play. and we had 3 or 4 GMs, I think, right?
Yeah.
And you picked one of the 4 or 5 characters we had made, and you got to sit around and play a quick one-shot session
Yeah.
with some of the people who like to GM at our school. I remember specifically a lot of the sheets that we had there had personality stuff that said it was a suggestion of 3 or 4 ways you could play the character,
Yeah.
and then something else on the bottom that was like, or if you find something that suits you better, then that's a good option too. Because we had a weird mix that day of people who had played before and people who hadn't.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear from the at least the 3 tables that ended up running a full game with 4 players each, the differences in how they played certain characters and where they ended up, because this player decided he was going to make something up for how he played the greedy gold dwarf guy or gnome guy versus the other people, the girl who decided to pick one of the options that was recommended,
Yeah.
personality wise.
Yeah. I'm talking about like character sheets you would find online most of the time. They don't really give you anything to work with, which is
Yeah, I think we had found those online. I think it was just,
no, we made most
you
of those
made those.
characters. We made a lot of those characters. I mean I didn't, but
I wasn't
I
involved in
I
that
didn't know
process.
that I was supposed to be GMing either, to be fair. I was just
We did mostly the financial stuff.
yeah, that was mostly on us anyways, but it's an example of that kind of idea working, I think is the best way to put it, where I think it's always important to remind, especially first time players, you don't have to play whatever we tell you to play. You're a player in this as much as the rest of us are, and you're entitled to what you want to be. If you want to be that class, even though we suggest you shouldn't, doesn't mean we're going to stop you. It means we're just going to be like, hey, it's going to be a bit more difficult, but we're going to help you, because that's what friends and good players are for. We don't abandon people who want to pick up the hobby, because God knows we need more players who are willing to play whatever they want and are not afraid to play what they want, I think is another important thing.
Yeah, I don't like to tell new players, hey, you shouldn't play summoner because it's harder to play than paladin. Or I mean that's a D&D specific.
Yeah, specific. But I think it could be something as simple as, hey, I don't want anyone playing, let's say, the transformed in masks. And for whatever reason, I don't know why you would do that in a game like Masks, but if a GM said that, I'd be like, well, why not? Because the system is very open for me being there. And if they say, well, it just doesn't work with my kind of world, I think you have to be prepared for that not being the only occasion where you are stopped in getting on what you want. I think you have to be prepared for, that kind of makes sense, but in this world, X thing happens, and you can't do your thing. I'm sorry. Which, I mean, if you can't find another game, I know that sucks, but my advice will always be first talk to them about it. Say, hey, I kind of wish I could do this. I mean, I know the problems you have with it. I'll try to avoid it as best as possible. Or it could even be just leave. If you're not having fun, there's no point to stay. Because at the end of the day, it's 3-4 hours of a game. And if you're not having fun with it, that's just not good. Though, as a GM, one, I've never had that conversation, but two, I would hate it if someone came up to me and was like, hey, I just don't want to play your game anymore because of stuff you're doing. I would hate that so much.
Well, you're usually good about taking
Yeah, but I
criticism.
mean that's why I do it. But as a GM, it would make me sad because in my eyes, it would make me feel like I failed the player in having a fun time. Especially if it's a new player. That always feels the worst.
I almost wish I almost want to talk to someone who has just played their first campaign, because it's been a while since I've had that experience.
I don't even remember playing my first campaign, to be honest, to a degree. I remember what happened, but I don't remember the feeling as much.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up into it, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
It's been longer for you than it has been for me, but for me, it feels like a lifetime ago. Where I was doing charge mechanics and all that stuff in Pathfinder wrong, and I was like, he should not have let me gotten away with those things.
but it's a good community. I think the at least the people that I've played with, who are new or I've been in games with GMs are experienced with new players in the session or in the campaign, and I haven't seen anything horrible happen. Usually the GM's super good about being like, hey, you're running this mechanic a bit wrong. Here's how you fix it. Here's what you should be doing instead.
Yeah,
But not being like, you should take that skill because that skill is better than, this other skill, or you should
yeah.
take that feat instead of this feat because, that feat's never going to come in use.
I mean, as the GM, I never want my players to be overpowered. I never want them to be overpowered because then it makes it harder for me. But at the same time, I don't want them to be underpowered because then it ruins the fun for them
Well,
as well.
I mean,
In fights.
like hand holding
Hand holding
the new
and what the whole process.
Yeah, the new players until because there are some people who want to min max and make sure that their character is the best, sword fighter in all the kingdoms, and then there are other players who are like, well, I want to be a good sword fighter, yeah, but I also want to be intelligent and charismatic and dexterous and have a high constitution and be smart. And you can't do all of it, but you end up sacrificing
Everything to achieve something that's impossible.
Yeah, to achieve something that's impossible. But it's like, usually you can, if you want, let's say you're playing a fighter and you don't want to have a high strength, I'm not gonna yell at you for that, but I'm gonna question, I'm gonna question your choices.
I have a few things to say about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I wouldn't be the. I have seen GMs who do pull aside new players and give them advice, but never, be like, hey, that's not how you should be building that character.
I think it's actually interesting because I haven't had that experience as much as me trying to explain a new system to everyone because no one has played it majority of the time.
Like, we've had that before though.
I've done that several times, whether it's like Ryotama with you, Stars Without Number with you again.
Yeah, Mouse Guard with
Mouse Guard with you again. A lot of games with you, like Masks, things like that. Like games that no one else knows except for the guy who read the rulebook, which is in almost every case me.
And games that you hadn't even played at the time either.
Yeah.
Until we played them.
I mean, I try to read them beforehand and get the rough idea, but playing and reading are not the same thing. I know that and I respect that. And I'm also a very bad reader, so.
Well, do you want to just talking about different systems and stuff?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about different systems in general, but if there are new players listening, or if there are new players who are interested in trying, or if there are people who haven't played yet and are interested in trying things out, you just know your only option isn't Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh no. I think especially today, I would actually say D&D. That isn't even my first recommendation these days anymore.
No, yeah, I think it's a bit more complicated of a system now than other systems. 5e is the 5th edition is getting.
5th edition is still easier than editions before it is to get in.
Yeah.
It's a lot more conceptualizing and then being able to put that on paper.
Yeah, but there are games with mechanics that are a lot easier and a lot simpler. Like Masks is a very easy game to understand.
Yeah, so I guess we should. I'm going to give a brief description on how Masks works. So what Masks is Masks is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which is a system that was originally made by Kevin Baker. Guess the name of the original game. It was Apocalypse World. So the basic idea is it's very focused on seeing the connections between players. This isn't a game you play one-on-one with someone else. It's a game where you have a group of people and you build connections between them. Masks is the superpowered teenager version of that. Think Teen Titans when it was good, not Teen Titans Go. Like shows like that, Young Justice, like other shows like that where it's very teenager and emotional, and you know they're gonna win, but you don't care because it's worth it for like everything that they go through. Kind of TV shows and whatnot, and the system is very simple. Essentially, the primary focus is: are you working as a team? Are you like interacting as characters with one another? If you have to do something, explain what you're going to do, and the GM will just ask you to roll 2d6 plus whatever it is I tell you to roll. And that's it. You either fail or you succeed. If you fail, what do you know? You're a teenager.
teenagers fail before they become better. That's how life is. But the reason why we say the system is very good is because one is it has a very simple dice system, a 2d6. Everyone knows what a d6 is. It's the most common dice in the world.
If you have a Risk board or a Monopoly game, you have a 2d6.
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to get into, at least in the buy-in. And two is because when you play a role-playing game, at least in my eyes, you shouldn't worry too much about mechanics. Mechanics aren't a big thing for you to worry about as a player. What you should be, the hardest part for most players is getting into character. With a game like this, it's very easy to step into as a character because it's asking you questions for the character.
Yeah, character creation in that game mostly is, who's your rival on
Yeah,
the
it's
team?
more asking about
who's...
relationships between players, actually,
Yeah.
the player characters, where it's like, hey, when you guys first team up, something bad happened. So, you, like, Bull, what happened that was so bad? Or, hey, you, protege, what did your master say about when they heard about the news? It's like stuff like that.
But
And you
those
play
are
arch,
that's interactions with not other player characters. But a lot of the questions that at least my character had to answer were like, who's someone on your team that you want to kiss before you die, or who's there was a good moment of teamwork in your first mission. Who was it with? Like, which other player character was it with?
and you set up bonds that exist beforehand, which is a very common problem in D&D, where everyone has a cool idea, but the GM has to somehow pull everyone from a different universe altogether and somehow put them in a tavern together and say, you are now best friends. Most of the time, that doesn't even work.
Yeah, unless you build characters together and have players talk about, hey, I want to do this, let's team up. A lot of the times, at least from when I've played D&D, specifically in Pathfinder, people make their characters on their own without having a lot of conversation, unless like when we played one session together and we made our characters have a relationship because we wanted to. But usually a lot of people create their characters on their own, and then all of a sudden you're stuck with a rogue who steals from churches and a cleric who's
trying to catch
the rogue
and doesn't know it's the rogue, like something like that. And then it's like, when they find out, everything's going horribly. And you can somehow survive, but it's not as easy for a first-time player or group
to deal with
to get that dynamic.
Which is why I would almost suggest for new players to build characters together and make sure you have at least a line of dialogue that's like a line of just written down, like, this is how we know each other. Just because it's a bit simpler, but what we're getting back to is the fact that Masks does that. You need to have that.
It's built in
as part of your character creation, because I think the first session you play of Masks is not the first mission your team has done together.
No, the very first session is building the characters, and that's something we'll talk about in the future. But for now, just keep in mind that building, like, this is a very good system for that. And when I say just Masks, it's not just Masks. It's all the Powered by the Apocalypse games. They're very good. They're like very modern games in the sense that we care about storytelling, and as a result, it allows for players to get together and say, okay, I had this character, and it helps you build the lines between one another. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have at least bonds with two other characters and say, yeah, I know this. Yeah, no, we have a thing already. So communication will be easier. Whether it's we go to the same school, we killed the same guy, it's not very distant and saying, oh, I don't really understand about this or that because, we've never met actually. So do I know this about your character? I didn't think so. Okay. How about that character? Do I know anything about that character? And then most of the time it'll be no. At least in base D&D and Pathfinder, where they don't really have anything to help you build that line between one another.
That and Powered by the Apocalypse systems tend to have they avoid that messy XP system.
Yeah, most of the time it's if you fail, great, you got an XP point. Congratulations. Or hey, you succeeded. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you get 5, you unlock a new move or you get a new level.
Yeah, the only exception being Dungeon World, I believe, but
even then, it's still an interesting system.
Yeah, as opposed to being like, well, that creature you just fought was worth 300 XP points, and you need 15,340 to
Yeah,
level
no,
up.
I don't like counting big numbers anymore, except for OSR games like Stars Without Numbers. But that's just me, because those feel like old school games.
Well, I think Stars is built um, with the idea that you have to count like
Yeah.
that in mind. Only because I couldn't imagine fast progression in Stars.
You took a step, that was a goal. Congratulations, you gained 1000 XP.
We'll probably talk about it another week, like goal systems and how we feel about that. But I do prefer games that have some sort of goal oriented system in
Yeah,
mind.
for sure. And I think so that's for players in general or for groups in general. I'm gonna talk a bit about more as GMs on like especially first timers. Um, First of all, congratulations, you're a GM. You have more work to do than everyone else. Don't let anyone tell you anything different because it's true. And two, you're gonna have to learn how to deal with your players not as friends. Most of the time, you have to learn how to deal with them as opposition. And it's not saying that the other side is bad, you're the villain of the game. That's not the case. You're the narrator, you're documenting what happens between players. And just remember at the end of the day, there are a lot of things worse than player death. There are a lot more things worse than player death. Anyways, going back to something we said way before I even decided talking about this, about how building connections between players, like the bonds, is saying, oh, that's right. As a GM, try to do that. And you don't have to, but especially if the game in mind, you're like, oh, they're all meeting up for the first time and X thing. But if you're scared of that, and you're like, I don't want them to be like killing each other, acting very weird, or worst of all, the awkward silence between everyone because they don't know what to say. Make sure everyone has a bond with one another. Say, okay, you helped that guy, I don't know, smuggle something out of the city before. That guy helped you smuggle something out of the city. You guys have worked together. Great, you're friends.
I think it's easier, not easier, but I think it's better for the GM not to dole those out though. I think it's better for the GM to ask like, hey, you've been in this town, but you've been in this town before. This guy's lived in this town his whole life. Do you have a shared experience? I think that's something that you have to do in character creation that I think the GM can facilitate that conversation. The GM can definitely be.
But I will say, as a GM, it is a lot easier
Oh
if it
yeah,
does happen.
naturally, yeah.
If they say, yes, it has occurred, then don't be afraid, but try to push for those bonds to exist. Because if you don't try, then they won't exist. Because they're never going to say anything.
I think a GM's way of doing that isn't saying, "Hey, you helped this guy, herd his cattle one day." It's
Oh,
like,
no, of course. Never be that forceful saying, oh, this is the story and how it's going to
yeah.
work.
Or the best way to try and get them together is find out something that the two characters would care about and put it in front of them, and see if they can help each other achieve it, or see if they fight for it. But even if they fight for it, it's still a connection, you know.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, again, a bond does not have to be a good thing. It can actually be, yeah, we fought before. Or that guy knows my father's murderer. That could be a good thing or a bad thing.
Or we both want this chalice, but now a third guy is trying to grab it.
Are we going to work together or are we still going to
Yeah.
keep fighting amongst ourselves for it? Like, things like that are great ways, especially for players to talk with one another in character. Because, again, that's still a very hard thing for new players to do. They're scared. And if you're the GM and this is your first time and you've never played a role playing game before, they're not going through anything as badly as you are, but still remember that it's not necessarily easy for them to voice their characters.
No, I wouldn't even say it's an issue with new players. I feel like it's an issue with players who haven't ever played with each other before. Because I still have that where I'll be playing a game with someone I've never played with before, and there's still a lot of awkwardness trying to communicate. Or not awkwardness, but there's, we don't know each other's limits, we don't know each other's boundaries yet, or we don't know what kind of experience we're both looking for. So we always end up kind of, backpedaling or stepping back a little bit, at least for the first couple sessions.
I fortunately have never had that problem with a new group I've played with, but that's just me. One, I GM a lot more too. The big group that I joined when I
was going for a completely new group that I had no idea who anybody was online. Um, all of us GM'd at some point, so we were all very open and very well knew all of our boundaries. And like, hey, if you're gonna push it as a GM, we can respect it. We're all gonna match you at some degree. I mean, it also helped that we all had like assigned roles. Like we assigned each other roles beforehand. Like, oh, you'll be the pilot, you'll be the fighter, you'll be the sharpshooter, you'll be the captain, like stuff like that. But when it came time, none of us knew each other's characters, and it was still hard for each of us to be like, do I know you somehow? Why do I know you exactly? Why should I talk to you? Other than, well, we're on a team together, so we should talk. It was a bit tough. So, as a player, I developed other things to throw in, like something unique that would make people say, what? Hold on, I have a question about that in character. Such as, like, I had a dog that I brought on the journey with us, even though we were like a military team. Why do you have a dog? I don't know, I just have a dog. Why do you have a gun? You have a gun just for the reasons of having a gun, right? I have a dog for my own reasons. And things like that. Like, it forced conversations, which I think is the most important thing, especially in character, for a new group, whether it be new players or experienced players of playing with new players. Just having something to break the ice, because again, that is really hard to get done generally. Like you said, breaking the ice is a bit hard, but I kind of subconsciously thought of that before, because like, no, he's gonna have a dog. Why wouldn't he have a dog? It makes complete sense for him to have a dog. But I can definitely see what you mean when you say that even with a group of experienced players, you're not knowing each other's boundaries is a bit difficult to surpass. But if you know,
Yeah, or just each other's styles too.
yeah, I think that as well. But I do think having the bonds is an easier way to just get around all of that.
I agree, but even so, there's issues where like I'm the kind of player who I will put on a voice. I will, speak every line of dialogue, and if my character wants to give a monologue, my character is going to monologue.
I know that very well. I've had to listen to it today.
But I've been in sessions where other people are like, no, my where they explain what their character's saying, or they explain what their character's doing, but they don't necessarily go full on into voices, or say exactly word for word what their character would say. And that's it's interesting when those styles mix together for the first time. And it's I had an experience recently where I was playing. You were in that game too. We were playing Pathfinder, or 5e was it? We were playing 5e, and um, it definitely felt like I was going full on into that. I am the character mode, and other people were more into being like, well, my character is going to say something along these lines and see how you react. And then I react in character, and they respond by saying, well, my character thinks this and also wants to say that in response.
In response to that, I would say the one I'm remembering, the player that you're talking about, was new. So I will give them that they had no idea how to act, and all of us had played before,
No, but
varying amounts. But yeah.
I think they're.
But you were definitely like the outlier in the sense that you were a lot more into it than the rest of us.
But
Me,
it's not
my
a
character
problem.
by default didn't say much.
I'm not saying
so.
it's a problem to play like that, though. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
the first time you play, either as a new player or in a new group, and those are different styles of playing the game. Finding a comfortable tone or rhythm for your character's interaction, it can get a bit bumpy.
I definitely agree. But that's something that you figure out with time. That's not something as simple. Well, all of you agree beforehand. It's not going to happen. Everyone will have different styles and expectations, even if you lay it out beforehand. Especially when it comes to being a character. No one can fix that except time. That's the only answer to that question, if it's even a question for some people.
Because then the players who aren't in acting voice are thinking, am I not going far enough with it? And then I'm sat there thinking, am I taking this too far? But again, I think a good thing that I've seen in most of the games I've played is the GM, especially you're especially good at this. Just sitting down and asking, hey, what'd you guys think? Where's the room for improvement? What do you want to see different, or what do you want to keep the same? And having that conversation after a game can be one of the most important parts of keeping the game alive and running.
Yeah, I will say especially having seen a lot of campaigns fall and whatnot, I would definitely say asking that question is very helpful because it makes people start thinking about what they enjoyed and what they didn't enjoy. And as a GM, you even if you're the most experienced player, you can't argue if you're playing with a new group that there are things that not everyone enjoys. So asking that question is very important to seeing how the group feels. So you need to ask. Obviously, if you're experienced, you probably ask this question a tons of times. And if not, well, I'm not going to say you might be overconfident, but it's not bad to ask once in a while, especially if you don't have anything to work on. If like, oh, I thought that was the best, but if your players think something else, saying, oh no, that was actually our favorite session because things really went crazy there when you yourself didn't think so. You have to make sure that the goals and the idea of the campaign is similar between everyone because again, it's a group game. You can't play this alone, and everyone has to be having fun for it to be really fun.
Yeah, I think that downtime after a game is
Yeah,
really valuable, though.
it's a bit hard. I understand for some groups to get that downtime, but I mean, you can schedule it in.
I
Usually,
think you have to budget it into your time.
yeah, remember to budget. It's like the same thing as when you start a session. You guys aren't going to start immediately going into voice. You're going to ease into it, saying, "Hey, how's everybody doing? Hey, you guys remember what happened last time and all that." And slowly,
Yeah. And then, there's always going to be the one guy, usually me, who goes, "Hey, I'm going to go grab a snack real fast," or "Oh wait, I need to go."
and then like 15 minutes later, when you come back with a snack, it's like, "Guys, I had a thought." And the next thing you know, I'm just like, "Okay, guys, we can play now. I'm ready. I wrote all my notes. We can start."
Yeah.
But no, like again, you're gonna run into things, and everything's gonna be unique to each individual group. But hopefully, the things we've talked about and the questions we've asked ourselves and answered for you as well helps as new players and experienced players. Because no one in this game is perfect. I mean, Matt Mercer is pretty good, but I won't say he's perfect in every regard, depending on
Hey,
the
don't say
scenario.
that. We might want to try and get him on the show.
Well, if he does, I hope he can convince me that he's perfect then, because
I know he's
I want to
perfect.
believe he is. I want to believe
No,
he
he
is.
is. Uh, yeah, I think this episode's more just to give
It's just
a quick taste of
introductory. Yeah.
introductory of what we think about what our experience is, and kind of give you guys a little like hint as to the flow of how these things are gonna go from now on. Uh,
Yeah.
if we could probably talk to each other for like 2 or 3 hours, but I think it's probably a good time to start wrapping up.
Yeah, so one last thing. We've already talked about what to do if you're a first-time player or whatnot, but I don't think we actually talked about what to do, how to get into a game, either if you're too shy or you have no idea how to do it.
I think we should move on to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Arthur, why don't yeah, I think you're better at the local. I'll talk about the ways I've learned to play because I've had to come up with a bit more interesting ways to find groups.
Yeah. Uh, so for me, a lot of it was, well, having grown up around it, just asking people, hey, I know this. I have played D&D before, or I want to play Pathfinder. Pathfinder was something that I we mostly played D&D in my friend group, and we decided to move on to Pathfinder because it's similar enough, but we wanted to test it out with each other. It was one of those things where I went up to people who I knew I was friends with who might be interested because we talked about Skyrim or something along those lines, and be like, hey, why don't we try this out? And I got 3 or 4 friends together because we lived in suburbia, so we just all rode a bike to each other's houses or hung out, got some snacks, raided my the parents' kitchens and stuff like that.
You had alcohol when you were that young,
No,
Arthur. Come on.
chips and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Potato chips,
We
popcorn,
have very different freaking things
sodas,
in our parents' kitchen. Then.
sodas,
Very
and,
different things.
yeah. But hanging out in the basement and just kind of playing games together. But I think the other way that I've gotten into games, or the other way that I've seen people getting into games, especially when I went to college, uh, kind of feeling around for interest, or I guess this is interesting to note that I was the I was on the e-board for our college's gaming club for 3 years. I was the president the fourth year, and trying to organize events around teaching tabletops, just to have people show up and check those out. And even in high school, I ran a club uh, about it was a board game club, but we always ended up talking while we played, Monopoly or Risk or Stratego or what have you. We always ended up talking about tabletops, and new people would join the club all the time and be like, "Oh wow, D&D! I've always wanted to try that out." And I'd be like, "Well, me and my friends meet up every so often and play it." So a lot of the ways that I've found groups, a lot of the ways that I got into playing a lot of these tabletop games was kind of word of mouth, local, just kind of talking to people, which is, I think, a lot different than you.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing in comparison to you is you were the one who was setting up groups or like talking to people, and you're like, oh, I know all the things already. Whereas I come from the perspective of, wow, finding a game is really, really hard depending on where you live. Because I got into it, like, I really got into the idea of playing it, like, the summer of my senior year in high school, where I was like, I really want to play before senior year. But the problem being that I had just moved, I didn't have any friends. So, what is technically my first game, but I don't consider it to be, was a 4E game for D&D on Roll20. And for those who don't know, Roll20 is essentially an online platform for playing tabletop RPGs. There's like a search system, so you can search for games that are being like recruiting players and whatnot. But
And it's free.
and it's free, yeah. Unless you try to be a GM, you get all the fancy effects like lighting and getting
Just the
more
music and
assets
stuff.
and stuff. Yeah, stuff that isn't necessary, but isn't bad to have. Let me put it that way. I say that because I own it as well, but I don't use most of those features because I'm a bad GM and I don't rely on Roll20 as much these days. But a big thing for me was, oh, I found a 4E game. I had no idea what the difference were between second edition and fourth edition at the time. I was like, it's D&D. All D&D is the same. Why would it be any different? That's something we'll talk about in the future. But it wasn't what I expected. And while it was a good way to get into the game, I had messed up character creation. I played my character really horribly, and I was just bad at the game, so I wiped it from my memory for a very long time. But when I was given the chance in college, because someone was advertising for it, I jumped at the opportunity, like I said. But I think the most important thing is, especially when I got more comfortable with the game, was that I wasn't afraid to go on Roll20 again and look for those games, or go onto Reddit/r LFG, because that's looking for groups to play RPGs with. And I joined one and I played with them for about 2 years. Only recently did I have to stop because of unfortunate circumstances. I say unfortunate, I got a dog, but that can be unfortunate to a degree. I don't like getting up at 7 in the morning. But the big thing is that you can't be afraid to try it. I mean, you could be like me where you're not very proactive on it, and you're like, well, if someone says something, I'll do it. But until then, I won't really do much. Uh, if there was one thing I really wish I had done in my life, it's that I got into tabletop role-playing games sooner. And of course, that's just me, but I really think it's an important thing to try. So even if it's just asking all of your friends, saying, hey guys, we've never played it before, but let's give it a shot. You don't even have to get a GM. You can go on /r LFG saying looking for a DM or GM to host the game for
LFG, right?
LFG, yeah.
Yeah.
Host a game
Looking
for
for
us.
games.
Looking for games or looking for groups, either way. And you could do it like that. You can go on Roll20, say, oh, I'm looking for something. Even if you're just willing to GM and don't have anyone to play with, just say you're willing to GM, you're a first-time GMer, and you're looking for other people to play with.
Yeah, there are a lot of people on the internet looking for players. From what I've seen, I haven't ever actually gotten in a game with people who I didn't already know beforehand. Actually, except for a couple times at college when we invited
Complete
people around the
strangers
school.
into
Yeah.
our bedrooms.
Well, but again,
essentially.
all right, yeah, complete strangers, but not complete. Yeah, people
People
at
who had gone
in
to
our
who were going
school.
to the school, but still, it was.
Yeah, and not into our bedrooms.
Well, no, you invited them in so they could see your shit, not me. But, you have.
Well, you know me.
Yeah.
Uh, but again, I haven't done a lot of the online searching for games, but there are a lot of places online to look.
No,
And
and
there are,
yeah, that's
and I mean, you can even post like I know especially on like LFG, you could be like, "Hey, I'm a new player. I want to play a game. I don't want a GM, but I just want someone, you know, who understands I'm a new player and isn't going to be all huffy puffy about that if I don't know the rules yet." And there are people who set up games for new players on there all the time too.
yeah. If you're looking for something very specific, I will say, well, in this case, Shadowrun. If you don't know what that is, it's basically cyberpunk fantasy set in like Japanese 90s essentially. Lots of neon lights, lots of gotta plug in.
Blade Runner.
Yeah, very
Blade
Blade Runner-esque. But there are two subreddits. Like I think one of them is Runner Hub. I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. But essentially, what they do is they allow anyone to join. You just have to create a character. There are some wonderful programs for that. I think it's Hero Lab. And if you use Hero Lab, you can basically figure out a character, and they will approve the use of your character because there are rules for the group. But what happens is they will post jobs or runs, as they call them, on Runner Hub and say, hey, we have these many openings. Who's willing to come in? And then you can say, oh, I want my character to join on this run. And yeah, so you can play with a bunch of randoms. The only thing you have to do is be willing to post it, being able to meet at that time, and be open to however the game's going to go. I've never used it personally because Shadowrun scares me a lot because of the way the system works, but I really love the world. I'm probably going to try it at some point, but it's an option out there for if you're scared to try the other ways and you're like, I just want to go in and potentially never meet these people again. That's one way to do it.
Either asking people that you know who you think might be interested, or finding people online. Whether it be people online who live nearby you, of course, it gets, you want to be careful about going over someone's house you don't know.
Yeah, my suggestion is play online if you are trying to find people
Over
to do that.
Skype or Discord or
Yeah, I mean, please don't be stupid and blame us for trying to go to some stranger's house and you got robbed as a result. Please, that's read the context of the situation and don't trust everyone. But if it's online, there should be no reason to fear. Also, don't take those games as the first impression. Um, I know everyone likes to consider themselves good players, but there's a difference between being a good player and a good party member, I should say, where you're willing to help the newer players and learn how to play the game and whatnot. Not everyone does that right off the bat, so don't take one person being rude as the standard. There are a lot of nice people in this community.
which is why I think it's easier to play with people.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you're willing to take the risk, don't let the first experience ruin the potential fun hobby that you'll find yourself in.
And I guess with that, that about wraps it up for episode 1 of hopefully an ongoing series.
Yeah, hopefully by the time you see this, there will have other episodes up at the same time. So,
Yeah, I think the first 3 episodes are gonna go up at the same time, and then we'll be continuing to do an episode once a week after the 3rd episode, after all 3 have been uploaded.
yeah. So hopefully, if you've stuck around this long, thank you for at least listening to what we have to say. How you give feedback to us is a completely different question. We'll hopefully have figured that out by the 3rd episode. So, just get all the way up to the 3rd episode and just listen to everything until we tell you how to feedback if we said something stupid and you feel very strongly about it.
In the description, in the description below, I'll have all of that information by the
So
time I upload
remember,
this.
don't
So
look at
that'll
that
be-
until the 3rd episode because we really want you to watch everything. It's really important that you watch everything.
No, we have an email right now that I'll put there as a placeholder for now, but I'm sure we'll have more things operating.
Even if you still listen to Arthur, please just go to the other episodes. Please. This is a lot. This is not going to be this is probably going to be the most boring episode, hopefully, of the ones we do. So, if we've
I don't know. I had fun talking.
I mean, yeah, we've had fun talking. I hope you've had fun listening. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but just give us a shot. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna end
Yeah.
it there. So that's SSE,
Yep.
which is the acronym.
The acronym. What? What acronym?
Yeah. For swords, shields, etc.
Ah.
Our title that we came up with all on our own and isn't stolen from a game we played together.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Anyway, see ya.
Bye?
You gonna say
Oh,
bye?
bye.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. And stop recording.
I got a hour and 51 minutes. Oh shit, still recording.